Hi, this is Lance Plumley with NCover. Today we're going to cover best practices for .NET code coverage, and we'll really focus on four specific areas and practices relative to these four areas. And these are code coverage metrics, team concepts relative to code coverage, the collection and use of coverage data, and ongoing optimization and data management. So the first of our categories is code coverage metrics. And I think we'd all agree that selecting the right combination of metrics to measure the effectiveness of your testing strategies and the quality of your code base is a crucial first step to using code coverage within your organization. However, it's also important to recognize that not all metrics are created equal. And to communicate this point, we like to use the analogy of an automobile. Okay? When you get in your car to drive to or from work, you're going to see different pieces of information presented to you. You'll see your speedometer, which is measuring your speed, the tachometer, which is measuring RPMs, the oil pressure gauge, which measures oil pressure, and the volume indicator, which is measuring the volume of your favorite song. Okay? These are all valid metrics and they're all useful. However, if you use your volume indicator to track how quickly you're driving or how fast you're going, you're probably going to get into trouble with local law enforcement. Okay? And the same is true for code coverage metrics. Not all metrics are created equal. So let's bring this back to code coverage. And let's talk about some metrics that may be historically popular, but maybe aren't as useful from a coverage perspective. And one of these is method coverage and perhaps also line coverage. Okay, these are valid metrics, but they really don't give you much detail about what's happening with your code. Okay, they measure whether a method was entered or whether a line was entered at all during execution, but they really don't show any details as to which pieces of your code were exercised or were covered. So the question becomes, how do we measure this and what are the right metrics to use? Okay? So code coverage is about using a core set of metrics and monitoring their trends over time to ensure that your testing strategies and in turn your application perform as expected. And in NCover, we focus on three core metrics. The first of these is branch coverage. And branch coverage is really how we measure success. Okay? And it's going to be the leading indicator of success and the key metric that we use within NCover. And to use a simple analogy of an if-else statement, with branch coverage, one condition or one branch is if a condition is met, and the other is if it's not met. And you'll always see branch coverage represented in NCover with the green and the red bars. And the color coding is very simple. Green means you've met the threshold that you've set. Red means that you've not met the threshold. And the next is sequence point coverage. Right? And if branch coverage is how we measure success, then sequence point coverage is how we achieve success. And it's going to be a key supporting metric in NCover. And you'll always see sequence point coverage identified next to your source code. So if you drill down to the source code level, you'll see the series of circles and diamonds to the left of the source code displaying your sequence point coverage. And actually, if you hover over those, you'll see the branches from one section to the other, and you'll also see those in either green or red to show that the branch is covered. So to recap, branch coverage is how we measure success. Sequence point coverage is how we achieve success. And the third key metric in NCover is going to be the change risk anti-pattern score. And the change risk anti-pattern score is how we mitigate the risk that impacts success. Okay? It calculates the risk of the code that you've yet to test, where the risk is represented by complexity. And it's very simple. The higher the complexity, the higher the risk. So to recap, our three key metrics in NCover are branch coverage, which is how we measure success, sequence point coverage, which is how we achieve success, and the change risk anti-pattern score, which is how we mitigate risk that impacts our success. So our first category was code coverage metrics. Our next category is a team-based approach to code coverage. And in our 10 years or so of working with different teams of different sizes across the world, we've observed that the highest performing .NET organizations have a team-based approach to code coverage. They've adopted the mindset that quality is a culture. And one of the activities that these teams engage in as part of their culture is consistently asking the question, how do we know that our code is good? Not do we think it's good, or not do we hope it's good, but how do we know for sure that our code is good? So if you believe that quality is important, how do you bring everyone on your team together with that goal? Okay? And this is where unified coverage comes in and becomes very important. It's great to measure individual effort, but ultimately it's about the team's ability to work together to deliver measurable success. And successful teams require rapid feedback from all areas, from development, from QA, and from the management team, so they can identify issues as quickly as possible, direct resources as needed, and prevent the escalation of these issues. And the key point is that results are shared and visible across the team. So regardless of whether you're a developer, a QA test engineer, a member of the management team, you can access the information that you need very quickly and very easily. So now we have a development philosophy that's positive. We have unified coverage. Okay? So how do we take that and how do we put it into practice? I think we'd all agree that tests give confidence in your code, and code coverage gives confidence in your tests. Establishing a baseline for coverage is critical to monitoring your progress. So that's the third in our best practices here in this category of team-based concepts, is establishing baselines and thresholds. And we often get the question from teams, what is the right number for code coverage? What threshold should we be shooting for? And the answer depends on a number of factors, one of which is, are you looking at legacy code or working with new code? So there are a lot of things you have to keep in mind there. And while the end result from the threshold perspective is important, it's not as important initially as establishing an accurate baseline. Because code coverage is all about where we're going. How are we improving our tests? How are we doing it moving toward the end result? So to measure that successfully, we have to have a solid baseline. So now on to our third category, best practices in the collection and usage of your coverage data. Okay. You can have a great team and you can have a great plan, but if you don't execute your plan through the manner that you collect your data, you'll probably fall short of your goal. Okay. We've observed that leading .NET teams generally employ the following practices. And these are not specific to NCover, but we do support them. And the first of these practices, or best practices, is the collection of coverage by the build ID, and you assigning a unique build ID. Okay, and this helps to ensure that your tests and your results are accurate. And in NCover, there are a couple of ways to accomplish this. The build ID can be set in the global machine environment using the NCover build ID setting, or by using the build ID parameter on the NCover run command. Second in this category is measuring benefits by testing method. And although code coverage can and should collect coverage from all tests, from time to time it's worthwhile to examine results by testing method. For example, if you're covering the same code with manual tests and with automated tests, and you're seeing 50% coverage from your manual tests and 50% with your automated tests, then that may not be an aggregate of 100%. It could be that you're combined at 55%. which means you're probably spending a lot of manual test time duplicating your automated tests. Conversely, if the combined is 80 to 90%, then there may be some duplication, but in general, it's a much better allocation of your resources. And third in this category is focusing in on critical areas that need improvement. Okay? And this gets back to your coverage metrics, because we're using those metrics and that information that we've collected to improve your testing strategies. We're using them to better utilize resources, we're doing management by exception, and we're focusing on the hot spots in your code. And this can mean different things for different individuals. Okay? For developers, focusing on critical areas might be monitoring your tests you're running in Visual Studio using Bolt. Okay? So you can go in and run your Bolt tests. You can see your code coverage. You can see your code highlighting. For QA and for management team members, this might mean tracking your metrics in Code Central at a higher level, and then drilling down to identify areas where you can potentially improve. Our last category are best practices relative to the ongoing optimization of your coverage data. Okay, and this is an area that's often overlooked, but which can have a dramatic effect on the performance of your team. Okay. These best practices are specific to nCover, and they are particularly useful if you're managing larger projects or larger teams. Okay. So the first in these best practices is using archive. The beauty of nCover is that we collect all coverage data, but to maintain optimal performance, you should archive your data periodically. And this just keeps your data store in a very manageable size and also improves the speed of collection. Okay? And this is the one issue that probably comes up most from an ongoing maintenance standpoint from a support perspective. We often see teams that have collected a very large amount of data, so the data store is very big, and that's impacting the performance of their tests and the speed of nCover. And just archiving on a regular basis can have a really positive effect on that whole process. This can be done on a scripted basis. Okay? And when you archive data, it's not deleted. It's saved so you can access it again in the future. Second is using the verify command or the verify option. Okay? And you probably have seen this little exclamation point with the yellow circle around it in nCover in the past. Probably it's usually related to the fact that you have an upgrade that's available. So we're giving you a prompt that you can now upgrade to the next version. But if you see this next to an execution, it may indicate that there's some issue with that execution. And running the verify command allows you to review the execution data within a project to see if it's complete and can be queried. So anytime you see that exclamation point on one of your executions, the verify command is always the best next step. Okay, and the verify command also has repair features. It deletes empty executions which have 0 captures. It creates missing document tree and class paths if valid document or method nodes exist but parents are missing. And repair also aggregates each execution and saves the execution to make sure indexes are correct. Third in this category is data storage. And like most solutions, nCover provides a default data storage location. And we try to make it really easy for you to get started, but also give you the ability to configure based on your requirements. And I know when you're getting started with code coverage or with nCover, it's particularly exciting. You want to get in there, you want to start collecting data, you want to see the results as quickly as possible, but it's definitely worthwhile to take a little time to think about where your data store is going to be located and what's going to be best from the team approach. I know we touched on a lot of information in a relatively short period of time here, so if you have follow-up questions or if you'd like to dive into any of the topics we've discussed in more detail, please let us know. I hope you all have a great day, and thanks again for joining the webinar.